Hi everyone, I'm Michele. I lead the AI team at Replit, and I'm excited to talk with Chris today from Runway. Welcome. I know you flew all the way in today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I flew in yesterday from New York.
There you go. Thanks for making it. Why don't we start from, of course, what is Runway ML? Perhaps many people here already know, but it always helps to understand exactly what you're building and why it's so important in the creative space in AI.
Sure, yeah. So Runway is it's both a research company and a product company. We build core algorithms and systems that we can then deploy into products that are now used by millions of people for all sorts of different things. Actually, the origins of Runway and this idea of building like this full stack company date back to like 2015. Where we really started like building algorithms and understanding mostly in the computer vision side of things, how we can take AI systems and apply them inside the creative context. I think that's the kind of like key overlap of what we do at Runway, kind of like combining a bit of the research with like artistic tools. And so we've been doing this for some time, and we're kind of like proud of making a bit of expressive new systems for creativity. We were basically helping, I would say, and I like to think about it in the best way possible, augmenting kind of like human creativity has been the core belief and vision of the company since the very beginning.
I'm glad you're helping people like me who don't have any creative skills become, more expressive. And if I recall correctly, Runway has started in 2018, right? So you're a Gen AI success story even before the Gen AI hype even started.
Yeah, as I was saying before, the company's like origins dates back to 2015, 2016. At the time, I think our fascination was with understanding algorithmic ways of both generating and automating content. And we started doing a lot of like mostly computer vision work. Where with me and my co-founders met at school at NYU. And then that was 2016. TensorFlow was like a year old. PyTorch, I don't think was released at the time. So it was like very early days of like I would say the new wave of I guess generative AI. It wasn't called generative AI at the time. I think
Just deep learning, right?
it was deep learning.
Yeah.
Yes, and then GANs became very like commonplace and relevant, and we're referring to it as synthetic media. But it was very different. I think it was the infrastructure required, the frameworks, the systems were nowhere near where we are today. There were so many things that had to be built to get to the point where we're seeing today. And I think it was a good reminder to think that a lot of the things that we're seeing now actually have been built during like decades of work behind the scenes. And so for us, I think something that we've learned, I guess, over time is this institutional knowledge and accumulated like know-how or heuristics about how to best think about both research, because things from, as everyone has been kind of like hearing and saying, have been moving super fast. And so things change a lot and it requires new mental states. And at the same time, you understand good practices on how to build products for your users and customers. In our case, we work a lot with filmmakers, with artists, with agencies, with post-production teams. They have specific requirements and like needs that they need to meet to be able to use stuff that we're building. And so what we're done over time is really, since the very beginning of both the company and my personal fascination with this intersection of both AI and creativity, has been understanding all those kind of like in-betweens. And those things do take time.
Could you imagine back then, like, could you connect the dots and see the future, like all the way to today, for example? The fact that it would have taken you just 5 years to go from where incorporated to where Runway is today. Like, did you expect AI to move so fast in parallel and you've been able to deliver like Gen 2, for example? Or did you have a much longer timeline in mind back in the days?
I think it's hard to predict speed, specifically early on. I think the vision of the company hasn't really changed. Like, we're still devoted to the same like core mission, which drives everything we do. I think what we've learned is that it's really hard to understand the magnitude of the things that you'll need along the way, because things do matter, do change a lot. There's it's actually this book I tend to recommend to everyone, which is phenomenal. That has been a huge inspiration for us early on the teams for building the team and the company. It's a book by Kenneth Stanley that I think OpenAI also was very influential for them as well. White greatness cannot be planned, and the core takeaway from that is really like start putting stepping stones into building your ultimate like goal, and start like understanding that more than like trying to create frameworks or systems or like long-term like objectives that are very well defined. Really right now what you need in this industry is like a lot of like stepping stones that allow you to like move ahead, look around where you can do, where you can move, understand behaviors and possibilities, and then move again and again and again. And I think a lot of what we're used to right now, frameworks and mental models and technologies might change tomorrow. And if you're building a company, I think you should devote yourself to your customers more to than the technology itself.
Totally. And I think that is probably the reason why at Runway you can make coexist people building product, but also your research arm. I think both of them have almost the same importance and perhaps a very similar account from what I heard. So you have a lot of people devoted just doing research and thinking about the future. How do you make this effective? How hard it is to make the two of them coexist correctly?
Yeah, I like to think that we have core research, as you were mentioning, but I like to think about it as an integrated like company that does both like applied research, but also deep understanding of like product and like UIs and experiences that are core to that research. And so we have, besides a core research team in the company, we have an agency, a production agency in the company. And so you have a very unique combination of skills and backgrounds where you have researchers that are also very sensible to like art and creativity and filmmaking and have a deep understanding and passion around it. Sitting right next, and this is like true on The Office, like sitting right next to someone who's been working on visual effects for the last 20 years, right? And so the level of like sharing and like insights that happen and like emerge from those kind of things is very unique, and it's very like much needed. And so our applied research team is not just like the researchers who are like technical research on paper, but I consider everyone in Runway a research scientist, because we're all kind of like taking very systematic, data-driven like hypotheses and thesis and experimenting with them, testing them really fast. What the ultimate goal is, as I said before, of like building tools that help augment human creativity. And that requires a cultural mindset, like a cultural like way of operating. And so our research team is not only a separate division or like a research lab that like that operates on its own. It actually operates pretty much with the team, with the product, and with the rest of the kind of like agency production side of things.
Yeah, so research is really baked into Runway. It's not like a secondary thought and that you run there. And it makes a lot of sense.
And it drives product all the time.
Yes. Product, exactly. So given that we're speaking about research, why don't we go to covering a bit Gen 2, which is a very recent release. A lot of amazing features. I think we've all seen viral tweets, how amazing is the content that it can create. Why don't you tell us more, like why is it so powerful and how long did it take you also to make it happen?
Yeah, so Gen 2, if you haven't seen it, is one of our latest like models that we've released inside both the product and our app. It's a video generation model that allows you to create or generate video conditioned on different like input mechanisms. So you can do video to video or text to video or image to video, and you can combine them in all sorts of different ways. It's taken us a bit of time to get to a point where you can build something like that. On the one hand, as I was saying before, there are infrastructure like requirements to get to train a model of that size. And there's also like insights of how you control these models, which I think is the key next step towards making this very much usable among the creative community. A model on its own that's able just to generate a video, it's not enough. You need to be able to go back to it and create positive feedback loops between the artists and the creators and the model itself. And so Gen 2 only represents like a step forward and builds upon the research of Gen 1, but really more than the model itself, which changes like constantly. I would say almost every week there's an improvement on it. it represents, I would say, a milestone, a stepping stone, as I was saying before, right? So you're putting stepping stones into the goal of, again, the mission of the company. And so one thing that we do keep in mind always is not trying to obsess too much with the models and with the state of the models, because it's not about the models where value derives. It's around what you can do with those models over time and how do you fine-tune them and improve them consistently, either with human feedback or with other mechanisms. And so that's what we do kind of like all the time.
Tooling is probably equally important, like how accessible they are, how easy they are to use. Model in isolation does relatively little if then the human can't use them correctly.
So, exactly, yeah.
So I was making this joke before when we were in the back room that you just won 7 Oscars. Of course, no statues at home, yes, okay. But we heard that Everything Everywhere All at Once just won 7 Oscars and Runway played a role in that movie. Why don't you tell us more? We talk about how good are your models now. We should talk about a success story of Runway.
Yeah, that's a very fascinating story, actually. I'm not sure if everyone here has seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. If you haven't, watch it.
Highly recommend.
It's beautiful. I don't know how to describe it. Someone told me like, what's the movie about? It's like, I don't know. Just watch it.
Worth watching, yeah.
It's very hard to describe. It's beautiful. And so I watched the movie like 2.5 years ago, and I was like amazed by it. And I researched. I started kind of like understanding a bit more who was behind the movie. Like, of course, it's an A24 movie, so probably like it's good. And then the Daniels, who were the directors, were tweeting that the VFX team or the visual effects team. You haven't seen it. It's a very visually intense movie. There's a lot of like effects. They were tweeting or saying that the movie was the team behind the editing side was just 7 people. And when I read there were 7 people, I'm like, that I'm sure like they're exaggerating a little bit. Like it doesn't make it out. Yeah. And no, it was true. It was just 7 people. Like I think 6 or 7. 6 was and then our contractor. And so I couldn't believe it. I started like searching for these like talented people were. And for a minute, I remember I was in the airport taking a plane, and I had the random thought of like searching for them in our database, and all of them had accounts. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I might just email them. And I emailed them, and they replied immediately. One of them, and he's just like, yeah, we used Runway for a few shots in the film. And so we chatted, and then I learned that most of them have never had the experience of building feature films. To that level. And so a lot of the processes of post-production had to be learned or have to be like perfected. And along the way, they were trying to search for systems and solutions that could help them automate or simplify really that process. And so that's how they came with Runway, and specifically with a rotoscoping solution that we have that automates a process in filmmaking called rotoscoping, which is kind of like very, very fundamental in post-production. And then we became kind of like friends. We keep in touch with Evan, who is one of the editors there. And I think one of the key, I guess, lessons for me or like takeaways from that story is that's probably a sign of what's to come. Where like these tools are tools. When I go back to like the mission, it's like tools to augment human creativity, to take your ideas and execute them faster than ever before, right? And this is a perfect example. Like that movie won 7 Oscars. It was edited by 7 people. They were very talented, that knew how to automate or simplify and change what was perhaps the common standard in the industry. And so other editors are amazed about the things they did because they really questioned everything and were able to take a different approach that was very successful. And for us, that's a bit of the what's to come, where if this will become so natural and usable and adoptable, more people will be able to make movies like that without having to have huge production houses or budgets or a lot of technical knowledge or institutional knowledge on how to do it. And that for me is like that in itself is a beautiful and very like great outcome of building the models. You're helping create great stories like those.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. I knew the team was small, but not this size. 7 people. That's incredible for real. Why don't we? No, I'm gonna be guilty of asking you this question. When do you think are we gonna be watching movies that are almost completely AI generated? I know we're gonna be on YouTube, so this prediction is gonna be proven wrong soon. But let's leave it there for the future.
I mean, we there's already short films that are entirely generated. And so, but I mean entirely generated, and just to make sure, because I feel there's like a good clarification to be made, which is, when I mean generated, it's not that you type in a word or a little sentence and like it magically creates a film.
It's a long prompt.
Yes, which I think it's a common misconception of sometimes folks who've never used a video generation model or generative model that might think that you're going to type in a word and you're going to get like a Star Wars movie, right? I think that will never happen. And I think that from a human and from a creative standpoint, it's kind of like boring, actually. And so what we see when we have very talented filmmakers using our tools is that it's a very much an iterative process, right? Like any other creative endeavor, it's about like loops. It's about like going one after the other, learning a lot about their craft. In this case, creating video is a craft on its own. And so the best analogy that I find myself kind of like coming back after all the time to make sense of this is to think about really generative models as a new kind of camera, right? And really, you're not going to become a filmmaker just by taking a camera and pressing record, right? You're not going to win an Oscar just by pressing record, in the same way that you're not going to make great art just by typing a word. And so when are we going to see, I guess, to go back to your question, when are we going to see films that are generated? I think you can already see films that are generated today that are like winning awards and they're touring around. We hosted a film festival in February of this year, and we exhibited 10 of those films. They were partially or entirely using kind of like AI techniques behind the scenes. But I think the goal is not really to like have films that are solely generated with no human input, which is, I guess, some of the confusion around like AI generated films. I think it's more, again, when are we going to see more feature films that are using AI generated media? And I think we're already seeing those, and we'll start to see even more coming soon.
So we don't want to outsource creativity to AI. Those would be very boring movies. We want to enhance the creativity of the movie makers. And that's something that is already happening today. Maybe where do you see things being in 1 year or 2 years today? Like right now, Runway contributed a few scenes, special effects. You know, what do you think is the next step?
You know, it's hard to predict. So I'll go back to that. But one thing that I think a lot in the history of like filmmaking is that, and in the history of like art in general, is that tools that have changed art have also changed narratives and aesthetics themselves, right? They've opened new possibilities of things that were kind of like unthinkable of before. So if you think about, for example, the history of cinema, when cameras were able to record more than just one singular image and like a bunch of frames were able to collect and were able to be like recorded, people who were using cameras at the time's first intuition was to go into a theater and record a theater, right? Like a play, a live play. And so a lot of the films of the time, of the early eras of the cinema were like theater plays, right? Because that's was the thing people had in mind that you could do with tools like this. And then they suddenly realized that it was like, it's much more flexible than that. It has a language of its own. You can take the camera and maybe take it outside. Let's start recording people coming out of the factory. And that's one of the most like early movies. It's like actually cool, people coming out of the factory, workers coming out of the factory by the Lumières. Or let's put the camera in front of a train. And so that's another early movie, the train arriving to the station, right?
Like neorealism.
It's a way of like, I have this technical thing that we've created that's insane. I don't know what to do with it. I'm going to put it outside. I want to record live, right? And you start realizing that you can do more than that. You can like start creating effects and like start editing and composing shots. And maybe you do like a first person shot. And so like all this language emerge from having artists interact and use and decompose the technology, right? And so right now, when I think about video generation and just generative AI in general, we're in the 1910s of the camera, right? So you're able to generate something, you're able to play around with it. Really what we need to do to see what's going to be next is that we need to put it in the hands of more artists so they can figure out what languages, what narratives, what like mediums might emerge from it. And why I say it's really hard, because it's really hard to understand or predict in the 1910s that you will be watching videos on TikTok, right? Because it's a camera, it's the same technical device, but like so much had to happen to get to that point.
Also the cultural shift in the way in which we record videos today, right?
Of course. I think there's mental models and like an understanding of technology that needs to be like present that we're seeing right now, which which is great because more people get exposed to it. I remember a story when I was building the first versions of Runway like 5 years ago. I went to this huge ad agency in New York, a very like famous ad agency, and presented to like a bunch of creatives there. And I told them like, the idea is that you can perhaps take language and use the language to generate images and videos. And it was very hard to understand for all of people like that like, so are you using like a rendering system, or are you like collaging images, or like, no, none of those things. This is just works differently. It works in a system of its own and requires a mental model that works differently. I think where we have collectively walked over the last couple of years is a better understanding of the technology, but I think there's still a long way to go.
Totally. I know we are running out of time for the Q&A. I just want to ask one last quick question, which I really love because I'm an immigrant here as well. You're from Chile, if I recall correctly, right?
Yes.
So you've built an amazing success story in AI, and I think you're the quintessential example that you don't have to live in Cerebral Valley to make something amazing AI. So do you have any recommendations for founders that are from South America or like foreigners? What are some of the hurdles you went through and some of the recommendations you can give them?
I mean, this could be like 3 hours long. So I'm gonna try to make it like short, but I really like to think about like systems. I think everything in life is a system, and like system thinking is a way of approaching everything. And so for me, really everything I've been doing from building the company to doing the research we're doing it's new. Like even like speaking in English is new. Like so understanding that that you can, if you figure out how to learn stuff, that's a very powerful trait, and it's a kind of like a superpower on its own. Like learning how to learn. And you can learn systems, and fundraising is a system, and building our company is a system, and building our culture is a system, and building our product is a system. And if you can learn the feedback loops and the mechanisms that those systems are like built upon, then you can do great stuff. And so I think what has taken us some time has been understanding those systems, understanding how to navigate those systems, but ultimately knowing that like you can figure it out. And it's funny that idea and I guess that trait of being an immigrant and like always having to like go through so many hurdles to just like build Runway has actually permeated in the culture of Runway. And the idea of like figuring things out is now kind of one of our values. Like I made a shirt the other day just says like figure it out. That's the mantra of Runway, because in a way, when you realize you can figure out anything, that's how you make great stuff.
Yeah, I think it teaches you a level of grit that many loggers, That's very inspiring. Chris, thanks a lot. Let's have a round of applause and then we'll kick it away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Let's start from the front and then we move back.
Say it out loud. So the screen actor skill decided to strike today in the writers field. It has been on strike months, and a lot of two industries obviously dealing with the technology reckoning right now. And I was curious how you see tools like keywords impacting the industry largely. I think the optimistic view is that your tool maybe helps up and coming writers free their films without having to go to big studios, but the other version is to just give studios all.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. The first one is that it's important that we're like more nuanced on understanding how different tools help change and transform different aspects of the industry. And so I think the collective like discourse has been dominated by like horror stories or fairy tales. And the truth is that not everything is like a language model, and not everyone is trying to automate everything for the sake of automation, right? And that's where I go by, I think one of the key things that we need right now in the industry is like better narratives. Like the new Mission Impossible movie is about like destroying an AI. Like, and so this us versus them type of like narrative really, really informs everything from regulation to discourses. And it puts everyone in a position of like understanding that everyone's building some sort of Terminator that's gonna like destroy everything. And the truth is that it's not. And if you speak with like filmmakers and creators themselves who've embraced or starting to experiment with the technology, it's a very liberating technology, right? It's different. changes will come for sure, but changes have always come in the history of like art and cinema. And for example, film used to be silent, and then talkies, which is like you can make films with audio, became possible. And a lot of the questions people had at the time was like, what's going to happen with the orchestras that are in the theaters, right? And sure, I mean, no one has orchestras in the theater anymore. And so those jobs like eventually evolved. But the possibilities and the things that emerge on top of like being able to have audio in movies was like massive, right? And so on the one end, I empathize with those things because I'm also coming from an artistic background and very sensible to like the things that you're making and the tools you're using. At the same time, not everything is like a zero-sum game or binary. It's like way more like gradual, like everything in life. And so I think what we hopefully will need is like a bit more of that like different set of stories and narratives.
Where's for the mic?
How did you get your first set of users?
That's a great question. So by shipping a lot and just being very open with the product, and then being very insistent with folks that showed some level of interest. I think I personally knew like first name and last name of like our first 200 users. They were like among our creative community. So we created a first version of the product and then just like show it around, and then try to ping people and just to build a network of users over time. I think there are different strategies. I think the one that worked for us is like tap into your networks and show the product and be very close, like extremely close to your early customers, because those matter a lot.
Yeah, thanks for ask the question. Like, I'm a big fan of.
Closer.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of your work. So I have like a bajillion questions to ask you, but I'll just ask you one. Like, have you noticed like changes in like the workflows for artists and like filmmakers when working with your tools? Because like one example is like in The Mandalorian, like they have like Sony made that giant like screen and reflexive, and what it did for them is like it moved compositing to like the production as opposed to leave it at the very end, right? And so have you seen like opportunities with Runway to like maybe move a lot of the work from like post-production to maybe pre-production, or maybe things like that, like opportunities that were not available previously?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one that comes to mind. We're working with this director on helping him realize early scripts into like living mood boards. And so a lot of the early parts of pre-production are like you script, you test some ideas, and then someone like has to like draw the scenes, and then there's a feedback process and a loop there. Imagine a world where you as a filmmaker, as a director, can visualize scripts and ideas and scenes like almost instantaneously, right? So you're not talking about like final comps or final renders. You're talking much more at the early stages. And one of the key limitations of any creative endeavor, I would say, is time and cost. Like a lot of times you're constrained because you have a great idea, but like you can't execute it because it's too expensive and because you don't have time. And so that's where like these tools become so liberating, because you can iterate faster on those. And I think in a way, great work is like an equals odd rule, where the more you make, the better stuff that you'll eventually make. So quantity will lead to quality in a way. And that's what we've seen a lot. Just early pre-production or early storyboarding has been particularly interesting and something I didn't predict a couple of months ago.
Thanks for it. Hi. I was curious if we could talk a little bit about the community and the community features. Like, how are people sharing best practices of prompts that work very well, styles that work very well, remixing each other's like templates, or are there any sort of unique features that you see in the space of video generation and more globally, like video creation with AI?
I think in the community side, embracing like the weird stuff, it's always like interesting, because there's something unique about things that have never been done before, that at the first time it could become like strange, but then eventually you start to master them. And some of the best communities we have a Discord and a few like channels of where our community like engages, is that they start to form their own like sub worlds. So there's like a Gen 2 science lab where people create just like microscopic worlds. And just like having it like emerge on its own and like, of course, foster it and promote it has been great. And make it like as public as accessible as can. I think that's been kind of like a core value within early stages of community building inside Runway.
All right. Thanks everyone for your engaging questions with Chris.